Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're gonna be checking out a video titled "The Real Reason No One Wants US Beef." So American beef is not wanted outside of the United States. That is something I did not know. However, we're gonna be finding out what's the reason behind that. This video is coming from the channel known as Type Ashton, and there's going to be a link in the description and also in the pinned comment section, so you guys can go show some love to that channel as well. And yeah, this is quite shocking to me because I know that there are a lot of American products, especially fast foods, cereals type stuff, and sweets and stuff like that are banned in other countries because of ingredients. However, the meat is something that I'd imagine would be a lot more difficult to corrupt. However, that seems to still be the case. So without further ado, we'll be checking out this video. So thank you for watching. If you have any recommendations, feel free to leave those in the comment section down below, or probably click that link in the pinned comment section where you can recommend videos using a Google form, and I'll check them out as soon as possible. Without further ado, let's check it out.
The European Union won't take chicken from America. They won't take lobsters from America. They hate our beef because our beef is beautiful.
The US president has announced a deal to boost beef exports to the European Union.
Because American beef is considered the best in the world.
The Americans basically say, we produce what we produce, and at the end of the process, we investigate whether that food is safe and secure.
There's no risk from consuming U.S. beef.
Some of our scientists, and by the way, some American scientists, have decided otherwise, that there is a risk.
I will not subject my children to anything that is unsafe.
If I wanted to put these guys on growth stimulants or steroids, I could take about 6 months off the time that they're here and get them up to that same weight at 15 to 1,600 pound range in 6 months less time.
Why can't we sell our product to the European countries?
Wondering why the United States has had a decades-long battle with countries like Australia, Argentina, the United Kingdom, and the European Union over beef?
But they ban American beef.
And why don't other countries around the globe really want it?
They won't take any of
Hold on, so we beefing over beef? That's crazy. I didn't even know about this. I didn't know. Wow.
beef.
Well, let's take a look. Earlier this month, United States President Donald Trump made it clear he's tired of beefing over beef.
They ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it.
As part of a sweeping tariff reform, his administration wants other countries to import more American beef. Now, this is actually really interesting because
I don't really understand importing and exporting the same item. Like, what's the benefit of that? Because, like, why would the United States import beef if it's trying to export the same beef? I don't really get what, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like I have cars and I'm trying to import cars rather than export them. If I make cars, I'm supposed to be trying to export them rather than import them because I already have them, right? The same car. I don't know. It's a little bit, I don't know. I don't know.
technically speaking, there actually isn't a ban on American beef in Australia. The US could import beef at any time if they wanted to. The problem is that American beef producers can't prove their American beef is American. Yeah, so to tell this story, we need to go back just a little bit.
Thank you. The fallout has already started, as you just heard, shortly after the news of mad cow disease in Washington state broke out.
In December of 2003, the first case of mad cow disease, otherwise known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, was detected in the United States in a cow from Washington. When humans eat meat contaminated with BSE, they can become infected with what is known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Globally, 233 people are known to have died from this disease. With this risk in mind, significant international trade restrictions on U.S. beef were triggered, including a recall of around 4,500 kilograms of meat and increased testing and surveillance measures. While the outbreak in 2003 was limited to a single case in the United States, it heightened the potential risk of BSE and its impact on global trade. And rightfully so, countries like Australia and New Zealand wanted to protect their citizens. So as part of their joint organization, the Food Standards of Australia and New Zealand, or the FSANZ, they created a rigorous food safety check system based on the World Organization for Animal Health methodology. In short, any country seeking market access to import fresh beef products, which means chilled or frozen meat, not processed beef products, must undergo this BSE risk assessment. And keep in mind, these standards are put in place to help ensure the health and safety of Australian citizens. And these rules are applied evenly and fairly to anyone who wants to import beef into Australia.
So in simple context, this is not a target at the United States, which is totally what a lot of people would probably try to make it out to be, unfortunately. But it's obvious that this is something to protect their citizens. The United States does the same thing, try to protect their citizens. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What I do find very unfortunate is trying to make it seem as if you were being targeted. You know what I mean? Like, if your product just doesn't meet the standard of another country, just doesn't meet it. It's that simple.
In 2015, the USA was actually granted Category 1 status, finding that the US had comprehensive and well-established controls to prevent BSE outbreaks in cattle and any contamination into the human food chain. But not so fast. You see, in the fine print, the provisional status specified that the animal from which the beef was derived must have been a, quote, continuous resident in the approved country since birth. Which is actually a pretty big problem for the United States, because we import a lot, and I mean a lot, of cattle from Canada and Mexico. An average of 700,000 cattle, buffalo, or bison from Canada each year between 2019 and 2023, and 1.2 million per year from Mexico over the same period, in fact. The Australian authorities expressed that significant of a herd change would require a further science-based risk assessment. Furthermore, Australian cattlemen raised concerns about the traceability of cattle born outside the United States and argued that all beef imported to Australia should be subject to the same rigorous end-to-end traceability requirements as Australian producers. In all fairness, the United States actually does have a national traceability system put in place, but pretty much everybody is in agreement that it is nowhere near as rigorous as the electronic traceability system that exists in Australia. And this is pretty much the exact same reason why Argentina also doesn't allow the imports of American beef. An official ban on U.S. beef has been lifted since 2018, but the country has maintained a restriction on live cattle imports until the two countries can finalize a new sanitary certificate. So there's actually a bit of a stalemate going on at the moment. On the one hand, the Australians and Argentinians feel very strongly that any beef that's imported into their country should be held to the exact same standards as the beef that's produced within their country.
Obviously.
Which I think is a fair ask. On the other hand, there are virtually no US companies that are willing to take on the level of tracing that those two are asking for. There isn't a feasible way where they could do that while still making their product a cost-efficient product to ship to such a far-off destination. But it actually isn't just Argentina and Australia that have bans on American beef. In fact, many other countries around the globe also restrict American beef products, although due to a variety of different reasons. For example, the Trump administration has also recently signaled out the United Kingdom and the European Union for, quote, non-science-based, end quote, restrictions on importing U.S. beef. Non-science-based restrictions.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Obviously, I just have a feeling that it's not true. But obviously, non-science-based means simply that there's no scientific proof why the beef is of any concern to not be imported. It's quite obvious, I'd imagine, but maybe it's something different and I'm just tweaking. But I just have a feeling it might not be the case. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way it's going to be banned from the EU and there's no actual scientific reasoning behind it. No chance.
Exactly. Well, to tell this story, we need to go back again. but this time over 35 years, specifically to the late 1980s and one of the longest, most acrimonious standoffs in world trade history. In 1988, U.S. meat exports to the area we now know largely as the European Union averaged 4,400 metric tons of beef muscle cuts and 68,000 metric tons of beef variety meats every year. However, in 1989, again, what we know today as the European Union and the United Kingdom restricted U.S. and Canadian beef imports due to health concerns.
Even Canada?
US dairy and cattle farmers specifically routinely used hormones like estradiol and testosterone to promote faster growth and improve feed efficiency. The EU's ban rationale was, and continues to be, based on its own scientific evaluation showing that daily intake of growth hormones can have negative health impacts, including evidence that estradiol can cause cancerous tumor growth. In 1990, the year following the hormone ban, U.S. exports fell 86% for variety meats and 59% for beef muscle cuts. Facing this substantial market loss, the U.S. cattle industry argued against the EU's restrictions, saying food safety testing in the U.S. shows, quote, no risk to adult health, end quote, and took their case to the WTO for arbitration. Over the next couple of decades, yes, decades, there were a variety of WTO court cases, scientific squabbling, regulatory changes, and tariff threats as the United States and the EU duked it out over beef imports. Notably, one of the more significant arguments from the Europeans was that while, yes, they would concede that the use of hormones may not pose a significant risk to adult health, the entire population does not consist of only healthy adults, but also infants, children, the elderly, and the immunocompromised. Ultimately, the WTO actually ruled in favor of the United States in this case. However, it still took decades for a deal to be worked out. Final negotiations resulted in a new agreement, which was approved in 2019. The principal measures of this agreement was to see hormone-treated...
Hold on, so we had the issue from 1989, 2019 was what... Yo, that's crazy.
Beef remain out of EU markets, and in return for a promise of a higher duty-free access of US beef to EU markets. Specifically, the EU agreed to a raised 45,000-ton quota for non-hormone treated beef imports, and the US is allocated 35,000 tons of this quota, phased in over 7 years. Which sounds like a lot, and given the fact that the Trump administration held an entire signing ceremony in the White House over this new deal, you would think this was a huge win for US cattle farmers, right? Right?
Yeah.
Nope. The EU pretty much got exactly what they wanted in the first place. You see, in order to facilitate a rise in U.S. exports to the EU, the United States had already started the USDA's non-hormone treated cattle, or the NHTC program, way back in 2001. Under this program, the USDA certifies that cattle have never been fed or treated with hormonal growth promotants, tracking cattle from birth through delivery to the packing plant door. This is basically a very similar quality control system to what exists here in the European Union, and basically confirms the fact that US beef producers, if they want to sell to the EU, will cease using growth hormones in the production of their beef. Again, under the negotiations from the Trump administration, it is only non-hormone added beef that is allowed to be sold to the European Union. But it gets even more embarrassing for the United States because not only did they capitulate to the EU's original demands for non-hormone added beef, but the dog and pony show that the Trump administration put on in the White House, saying things like,
"This is a tremendous victory for American farmers, ranchers, and of course European consumers, because American beef is considered the best in the world."
The reality is that this negotiation impacts a laughably small amount of American beef producers and U.S. beef products.
It's quite obvious. Like, if the European Union was like, all right, listen, check me out. You can import, bro, but check me out. The hormones, you can't have them in there. Like, that's a win for the European Union. They're getting what they want. However, the big problem is, like, a lot of American farmers are not going to comply with that, which then still reduces the amount of beef imported into Europe. You know, it's yeah.
weeks. Given the extensive documentation requirements for certifying cattle, many American producers have expressed that this production and certification is really just best suited for relatively small calving through finishing operations, and that cattle transfers would be pretty much impossible to do. And given the costs associated with registration, certification, and documentation, not to mention just the hoops you have to jump through in order to produce beef under these regulations, yeah, most farmers just aren't willing to do it. As of March 2025, according to the USDA, only 14 farms, ranches, or feedlots were registered under the NHTC program. That's right.
14?
Out of the 732,123 cattle farms across the United States, only 14 meet the hormone-free certification process, or 0.00001% of farms. Now, to be fair, farms come in all shapes and sizes and production capacities. But even if we were just to look at total output, we're still talking about an exceedingly small amount of beef. In 2022, the U.S. produced 12.6 million metric tons of beef in total. Meanwhile, only about 33,000 of that was hormone-free beef sent to the European Union. In other words, about 0.25%, 0.26% to be exact, is what we're talking about here. And you know, in this regard, I think you probably could make the argument that the EU is putting in kind of a pseudo-tariff barrier by requiring laborious and somewhat expensive documentation if beef producers want to import their beef here. However, I think it's also worth putting this all in the perspective of this phrase. If they wanted to, they would. Non-hormone added beef in the United States is largely sold under the organic label and only accounts of 3% of total beef sales there. Granted, this market share is rising, but conventionally produced beef dominates the market, holding 92% of sales, and grass-fed beef the remaining 5%. Yet while the organic beef is largely considered a luxury item in the United States, it's standard practice here in the European Union. In the EU, livestock are often fed diets that emphasize grass and forage, rather than the grain-heavy diets commonly used in the United States. And basic standards here prioritize natural feeding practices, with many farmers opting for grass-fed and organic feed to produce beef that is both high quality and nutrient-rich. Now, yes, this does mean that the wholesale price of beef here in the European Union is higher than that.
Hey man, listen to me, man. Like, in life you gotta pay for what you want. Like, the thing is, like, I've said this time and time again. I've had the experience with the United States and with Europe, to be Finland to be specific, right? And I am telling you, the cost of living in each country is totally different. But what you get for the return on whatever you invest in Europe is much more substantial. It's that simple. It's not a joke. It's not as if you're gonna pay $1,000 for a piece of beef and then, you know, that beef puts you in a hospital or gives you some sort of illness. You're almost guaranteed to be okay, right? It's so similar to like the healthcare system and a lot of different things that goes on in the EU. It's just as simple as that. Like, I'm not trying to exalt the EU, because I'd imagine there's things that are happening in the EU that are not perfect. But it's as simple as that, that when you invest in whatever you're investing in, food, clothes, cars, shelter, your health, whatever it is, your return is much greater in the EU. It's that simple. But in the United States, it's much easier to do it. It's cheaper. It's that simple. It's cheaper. But cheaper doesn't mean better. It's just more accessible in a sense.
In the United States, and probably also contributes to the statistic that Europeans just don't eat as much beef as Americans do. But in the United States, we hear this argument often that U.S. beef producers couldn't possibly switch to an organic means of production, that not using hormones would be incredibly expensive and the beef market would collapse. But I really kind of have to question that, because if the EU can do it, why can't the United States? And that brings me to my final point. The thing to keep in mind is that even if the United States started only producing organic beef tomorrow, for places like the European Union, Argentina, and Australia, they don't need US beef per se. In all the countries and economic zones that I just listed, production capacity actually exceeds domestic demand. Australia, for example, produces significantly more beef than it consumes, exporting around 68% of its total beef and veal production. Argentina, ranked by the way as #1 in the world for beef consumption per capita, also produces far more beef than is consumed domestically.
I mean, but like when you evaluate the situation like this, it really makes sense why they would not want any type of negative beef to be entering into the country, because they literally have more production than what people want. So like, it's even saving you as a competitor, because like, I don't know, man, maybe it could be strategic, because like, I just don't think it could be strategic either. Why? Because I was gonna say it could be strategic that they're like, okay, we don't want this imported beef that is used on hormones and all of that to, you know, be so cheap that the citizens of this country start to buy that beef, right? It could be that. But at the same time, I'm thinking about it, beef that is imported is not gonna be as cheap as it is in its original place. So the beef in the United States, after exporting it and it is imported into a different country, it is not as cheap as it was in the United States, because all those fees and export fees that you have to pay and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's strategic. I think it's just common sense. They just want to make sure that the beef stays neutral. Simple as that.
The EU, while not as heavy on the beef diet, as a whole is still largely self-sufficient in beef, producing more than is consumed domestically each year, leaving a relatively small exportable surplus of about 8 to 10% of production. It is, however, worth noting that the UK specifically does not have a beef surplus, and I want to make this distinction because the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union thanks to Brexit. However, that being said, the vast majority of the imports that the UK has of beef largely come from Ireland. It's somewhere in the ballpark of 76%. But on a larger meta level, the UK and the EU's ability to produce high-quality goods also skews the agriculture and food trade deficit. We mostly export high-value products here: wine, spirits, charcuterie, olive oil, cheese, while the US exports low-value commodities: soybeans, feed corn, wheat. The fact that these have lower unit value is due in part to the fact that they largely haven't been refined into an end-user product yet, which is important to consider, specifically when you think about how production influences consumer spending habits. I've made a couple of videos on this topic in the past, but it's just important to underscore one more time of just how different food production and specialty goods impact the way people shop and buy between the United States and Europe. Farms in the US, on average, are 10 times bigger than in the European Union, and they're able to churn out raw materials, hunks of meat, blocks of cheese, silos full of cereals and grains. But the EU is largely the opposite, a mosaic of small, regionally diverse farms. Its producers are uncompetitive in most commodities, but possess an advantage in traditional foods. For example, the continent has 5 times more geographical indication trademarks than the United States, allowing its farmers to transform simple crops into premium goods. When you go to the grocery store, the produce is labeled loud and proud with its place of origin. Regional goods have special bright yellow stickers, and so whether you're buying eggs, milk, flour, noodles, honey, beef, and beyond, consumers here demand to know where their products came from and prefer to buy local. And again, in another video that I've made on the subject, which, by the way, I'll link all of this down below in the description of this video, this same preference for locally sourced organic ingredients also extends to fast food as well, with major chains like Burger King, Subway, and McDonald's advertising and investing heavily in farm-fresh ingredients with short supply chains. Quite frankly, you're not gonna find US beef in your McDonald's Big Mac here in Germany. despite the fact that it's one of America's largest international fast food chains. By and large, European consumers don't want it. And by the way, that Big Mac, despite having locally sourced organic ingredients, costs the exact same here in Germany as it does in the United States. Interesting food for thought for this week for sure. But I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Beef imports specifically have been set.
There's no way. There's absolutely no way. Are you serious? I'm sorry. Are you serious that the there's no way a Big Mac in Germany is the same cost as in the United States? There's no way. Dude, what the hell? Hey, I'll say this. You know, the United States is a great place for hustlers. You want to make some money? That's your spot. You want to live a comfortable life? EU, Europe, that's your spot. And it's going to be like that for a very long time, probably forever. But it's quite unique what she just said. Like I feel like I'm being scammed, you know, when she said that, you know, because wow, it's the same price. How is that even possible? It's different ingredients. It's everything is different. Hey, you guys can let me know in the comment section down below. But I can for sure say I've had you know, McDonald's here in Europe. I'm not gonna say I like it. I really don't like it here. The ones in America, definitely I do like it, even though it's very, very bad for you. But the ones that I've had in Europe, they don't taste the same. That's for sure. For example, I'm talking about in Finland, by the way, right? But what I will say is, I find myself buying more Finnish products. Like Hesburger is a Finnish burger, you know, shop, and I find myself going there more than I go to McDonald's, like way more, like 1-to-10 ratio. So yeah, it's pretty cool, pretty flavorful. It's actually really good. You should try it if you ever visit here. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. I'm out of here. Peace.